Hello everyone, welcome back to GraveTales. I know many of you enjoy listening to these videos as you fall asleep. I want you to leave a comment on where in the world you're tuning in from, and if you're enjoying the story, be sure to like and subscribe. Alright, now let's get into tonight's stories. Story 1. I grew up in a town so small you could drive straight through it in under 5 minutes and barely notice you passed anything at all. We had one stoplight, one gas station, and a diner that's been serving the same greasy breakfast since the 70s. The kind of place where people leave their doors unlocked and everyone knows which pickup truck belongs to who just by the color of the rust spots. The name of the town probably doesn't matter, but I'll say it anyway, just to make this feel real for both of us. It's called Ridgeway, nestled between forest and farmland in the back pocket of Oregon. If you search it online, you'll mostly find photos of fog-covered pine trees, a run-down post office, tamed the Ridgeway High football team back in '94 when they actually won something. But behind those cozy little pictures and fading memories, something else about Ridgeway people try to forget. A shadow that hasn't quite gone away, even after 20 years. You see, Ridgeway isn't just a sleepy town with friendly neighbors and quiet streets. It's also the place where 7 people were murdered over the course of 13 months. And for a long time, we believed we caught the man responsible. We believed it so strongly that we built our peace on it. We raised our kids, got on with our lives, and told ourselves it was all in the past. But lately, I've been wondering if we were wrong. I've been wondering if the nightmare that ended in 2003 never really ended at all. Back then, I was just 16, not old enough to understand everything, but old enough to feel fear creeping into my bones. At that age, you're supposed to be worried about school dances, driver's licenses, and maybe who you'll sit next to at lunch. But for me and for everyone else in Ridgeway, those months were different. The first girl who went missing was Angela Marks. She was 22. Worked at the bakery on Main Street. I didn't know her well, but I remember her always wearing bright red lipstick. She disappeared on a Wednesday in early spring. Just didn't show up for her morning shift. Her boyfriend at the time said she went out for a walk and never came back. Nobody panicked at first. People disappear sometimes. Maybe she ran off. Maybe there was an argument. Maybe she'd show up in a day or two, embarrassed and a little hungover. But a week later, they found her body in the woods just outside the logging trails. Her wrists had been tied with something that looked like curtain cord. Her eyes were gone, and resting on her chest was a folded square of white fabric, carefully pressed. The medical examiner said she'd been dead for about 5 days. No signs of assault. No drugs in her system. Just terror. That's the only word the sheriff used when he talked to the press. She looked terrified. We hadn't seen a murder in Ridgeway since 1983, and even that one was a bar fight gone too far. This was different. This felt planned, cold, ritualistic, and even though nobody said it out loud at first, everyone knew deep down that whoever did it wasn't done. Over the next year, it happened 6 more times. Same pattern, same strange signature. The white cloth on the chest, the missing eyes, the remote locations. Women, mostly, all local. All alone when they vanished. And every time the town held its breath, hoping this one would be the last dot, we started calling him the Ridgeway Reaper, though the papers tried to avoid using nicknames like that. Said it gave him too much power, but people used it anyway. It helped us put a face to something faceless. It helped us feel like we had some kind of control. The fear was everywhere. People stopped going out at night. Hardware stores ran out of deadbolts. Some folks even started carrying guns, which was rare around here. Parents walked their kids to school in groups, and even the tough old farmers began locking their barns. I remembered the look on my mother's face every time I came home late, like she was holding her breath until the second she heard the door creak open. No one was sleeping well. No one felt safe. And for 13 months, Ridgeway was a ghost town of whispers and headlights and prayers whispered into pillows. Then, in late August of 2003, they caught someone. His name was Franklin Duval, though everyone just called him Frank. He was quiet, kept to himself, worked the early shift, driving a garbage truck, lived out on the edge of town in a cluttered trailer that always smelled like oil and onions. Police said he fit the profile. Said they found fibers in his truck that matched the curtain cord. Said one of the victim's earrings was found behind his couch. Said he confessed just a few hours into questioning. Frank didn't put up a fight, didn't ask for a lawyer, didn't deny it, just nodded and told them where to find one of the last missing girls. Her body was exactly where he said it would be. Case closed. People cried tears of relief at the town hall. The sheriff got a medal. Reporters came and went, and little by little, life returned to normal. We were safe again. But here's the thing now. In 2025, 22 years later, it's starting all over again. Another woman. Same pattern. Bound wrists. Eyes removed. A clean white cloth on the chest, just like before. But here's the part that's impossible to explain. Frank Duval died in prison 10 years ago. So if he was the Ridgeway Reaper, then who was doing this now? Or maybe the better question is, was Frank ever the Reaper at all? Before 2003, the worst crimes we had in Ridgeway were DUAs and the occasional dispute over property lines. Maybe a stolen bike or a broken car window if someone got too drunk after closing time at Murphy's Tavern. Our police force had 4 full-time officers and 1 part-time dispatcher who also ran the town's antique store on Saturdays. There just wasn't much crime to solve, so when Angela Marks was found murdered in the woods, didn't just shake the town, it shattered. The illusion that Ridgeway was untouchable. That illusion, the small town safety blanket we all wrapped ourselves in, got torn straight down the middle the moment the sheriff made his first statement. He called it a suspicious death at first. That was the phrase he used. But within a day, we knew it was worse than that. Angela's body had been found by a pair of teenage boys skipping school to smoke behind the old Sawmill Road. At first, they thought it was a mannequin, which tells you everything about how clean, how deliberate the scene was. No blood, no mess, just her lying on a bed of pine needles, hands tied loosely across her stomach, a square of white cloth folded neatly over her chest like a handkerchief. Her eyes were gone, not swollen shut, not damaged, gone surgically removed, clean cuts, no hesitation marks. The news didn't say that part. But my dad worked for the volunteer fire department, and when he thought I couldn't hear him talking to my mom late one night, he whispered it to her like he was afraid saying it out loud would make it real. She didn't scream, he said. No struggle. It's like she just let it happen. My mom said a prayer. My dad didn't sleep. Nobody did. 3 weeks later, there was another body. Laura Kendall, 26. She was a nurse at the Ridgeway Family Clinic, friendly, engaged, to a mechanic named John. They were saving up to move to Portland. Everyone liked her. The kind of woman who remembered your name, even if she'd only met you once. Her car was found abandoned on the edge of McDaniel Creek. Doors locked, keys still in the ignition. The engine was cold, but the hood was popped like she'd pulled over for something. Her fiancé said she had left work around 5:45 p.m. and texted him at 5:57, saying, "Be home soon. Gonna stop for gas." She never made it home. Her body turned up 6 days later, near the fire access road past Hollow Ridge. Same position, same clean removal of the eyes, same white cloth on her chest. No DNA, no signs of a struggle, a tire, tracks, no witnesses, and most disturbing of all, no obvious motive. She hadn't been robbed. Her engagement ring was still on her hand. Her wallet was untouched. There was no evidence of sexual assault. Whoever did this didn't want money or revenge or passion. He wanted something else, something colder. The third murder happened just as the town was preparing for the Ridgeway Apple Festival. That might not sound like much, but around here, it was the biggest event of the year. Families would come in from neighboring towns. Pie contests were held, hay rides set up, a couple of food trucks parked out front of the church. It was the closest thing Ridgeway had to a real celebration. But then they found Maggie Selquinantine, college student home for the weekend in an old ranger cabin behind Trout Hollow. Same pattern, same white cloth, same surgical precision. The festival was canceled the next day. Businesses started closing early. Nobody walked their dogs alone anymore. Pepper spray sold out at the general store. Local radio stations stopped playing music and started taking calls from scared residents. I remember hearing one woman's voice on the air, shaking as she begged the killer to stop. "Please," she said, "we've got kids here." Still, the police were stumped. They brought in detectives from Salem. Even a behavioral specialist from the FBI came down for a few days, but the killer wasn't leaving anything behind. No prints, no hair, no DNA. It was like he didn't exist at all. They tried to link the victims. Maybe they all knew each other. Maybe there was a pattern, a shared workplace, a location, a timeline. But their WASN, single quotes, didn't. Angela worked in a bakery. Laura was a nurse. Maggie was a student. Different ages, backgrounds, routines. Nothing in common except that they were all women, all locals, and all found within a 10-mile radius of Ridgeway. And that damned white cloth on their chests, always the same, square-shaped, perfectly pressed, not torn from anything, it's placed there, like it was supposed to mean something, like a message we couldn't understand. By the time victim number 4 was found, Samantha Holt, 32 real estate agent, divorced. Our town had changed completely. You could see it in the faces of the people at church, the way they locked their cars, even when they were just pumping gas, how neighbors started glancing out their windows. Every time someone walked by, you could feel it in the silence that settled over the diner, in the way kids whispered stories about the man in the woods, and how even the toughest guys in town stopped laughing when the sun started to set. My own parents started fighting more. My dad wanted to move. My mom didn't think we could afford it. And me, I started checking under my bed again at 16. I'm not proud of that, but I was terrified. We all were, because this wasn't just a string of murders anymore. It was a pattern. It was someone watching, waiting, choosing, and the worst part, we didn't know why. That might have been what kept people up the most. Not just that someone was killing, but that it made no sense. No motive, no message. No demands, just method, just ritual, just death. The press gave the killer a name not long after the 4th victim, the Ridgeway Reaper. It sounded dramatic, even a little silly, something out of a movie, but people clung to the name like it gave shape to the horror, made him seem less like a ghost and more like a person, something that could be caught. Somehow, that name gave people hope. Hope that this thing, whatever it was, had an end. But no one really believed it, because with each new victim, Kayla wasn't getting careless. He was getting better, more precise, more invisible, more terrifying. By the 7th murder, Vanessa Klein, age 24, we had reached the breaking point. I remembered the emergency town meeting at the rec center. Hundreds of people packed inside, demanding answers. Some of them crying, some of them shouting. One man, red-faced and furious, slammed his fists on the folding table where the sheriff sat and screamed, "What the hell are you even doing?" The sheriff didn't have an answer, but someone did. A few days later, a name appeared on the scanner, a man arrested outside. The gas station, after an anonymous tip, came in. Franklin Duvall. And just like that, everything stopped. No more bodies, no more white cloths, no more fear. At least, not right away. Because even though Frank confessed, even though he led them to one of the last missing victims, even though the town got to breathe again, there were things about his confession that didn't quite add up. Little things, quiet things, forgotten things, things I'd only remember years later, once the killings started again. I still remember the day they arrested him. It was late afternoon, maybe around 4:30. I was walking home from school, cutting through the alley behind Delaney's Hardware, the same shortcut I took every day. I had headphones in, one earbud in, one out. Like always, just enough to drown out the world, but still hear if someone shouted my name. Small town habit. You never know who might pull up beside you and ask how your family's doing. The air felt strange that day, heavy, still, like the world was holding its breath when I turned the corner onto Sycamore Street. That's when I saw it. Two cruisers parked sideways in front of the old mobile home park, lights spinning, but no sirens. Officers crouched low near the ditch, guns drawn, and standing in the middle of it all was a man. Didn't recognize at first. He was tall, maybe 6'2", but his shoulders were hunched, and his hands were raised in the air like he was trying to catch something falling from the sky. He didn't resist, didn't yell, didn't look scared. He just stood there, still as a statue. That was Franklin Duvall, the man they said was the Ridgeway Reaper. I didn't know him personally. Not many people did. He was one of those background figures in town. Someone you maybe saw once a month at the gas station or shuffling to the grocery store in a faded flannel shirt with old stains on the sleeves. He lived in a trailer on the far edge of town, tucked behind a thicket of untrimmed pine and blackberry bushes that had grown wild across the years. No one ever visited him. No one ever talked about him. He was just K. I'd heard he used to drive a garbage truck before his company laid him off in late 2001. After that, nobody seemed to know what he did. Maybe a few odd jobs, fixing things here and there. Some said he collected scrap metal and sold it for cash. Others said he barely left his home, spending his time with a shortwave radio and a black and white TV from the 80s. He had no wife, no kids, no social life. People called him a loner, but in Ridgeway, that term meant something more. Not just someone who kept to themselves, but someone who made other people uneasy. You didn't talk to a loner. You just hoped he wasn't watching you through the trees. So, when the news broke that the Ridgeway Reaper had a name, most people nodded and said, of course, it was Frank. 'Cause, even though no one really knew him, it felt right, and that's what scared me. The police never shared exactly how they found him, not at first. It was all wrapped in vague statements about developments in the investigation and new leads, but bits and pieces leaked out over the following days, just enough to stitch together a picture that, at the time, felt convincing. They said they found fibers in the back of Frank's old work van, fibers that matched the cord used to tie up the victims. They said they found an earring behind the couch in his trailer, one identical to the pair worn by Maggie Selker the night she disappeared. But what really sealed it, what made it all feel real, was the confession. Apparently, Frank admitted to everything within just a few hours of being brought in. He didn't ask for a lawyer, didn't plead the fifth, didn't try to explain anything away. He just talked, said he was tired of hiding, said he'd been waiting for them to catch up, said he thought the women deserved peace. He even led them to the final victim, Jessica Merritt, who'd been missing for over a month. They found her body buried shallow beneath a cedar tree about 6 miles past the logging road. Same signs, same positioning, same white cloth. Frank knew exactly where to look. He described the crime scenes in chilling detail. He named all the victims. He remembered the dates. And just like that, the nightmare was over. or so we thought. For a while, I believed it. We all did, because it was easier to believe. It was easier to point to a single man and say, "There, that's the monster." It made the world feel stable again, predictable, safe. But looking back now, with everything I know, I realized something. It was too easy, too neat, too fast. Think about it. 7 women killed over 13 months. No pattern in victims, no apparent motive, no witnesses, no hard forensic evidence. The killer was calculated, methodical, invisible, and then, suddenly, he just confesses, after a single arrest. And not only confesses, but gives full, clear details of every murder, some of which were never released to the public. People called it a slam dunk, a perfect ending. But here's the thing about perfect, okay? Endings in real life, they usually mean someone's hiding something. The trial didn't last long. Frank's public defender barely argued. Frank pled guilty to all count 7 murders. He showed no emotion during the hearing, no tears, no outbursts, just stared straight ahead like he was somewhere else entirely. When asked if he had anything to say to the victims' families, he said, "I'm sorry they had to go through this. I did what I did. It's over now." That was it. He was sentenced to 7 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole, and Ridgway tried to move on. The local paper ran a headline, "Justice Served, Ridgway Reaper Behind Bars." But the more I looked at that headline over the years, the more something about it felt off, like it wasn't true, like the real story hadn't been told. Yet, Frank died in prison in 2013. Heart failure. He was only 5'3". There was no autopsy, no family to claim the body, no funeral. His ashes were reportedly scattered somewhere outside the prison gates, and just like that, the man who had confessed to killing 7 women was gone. Case closed, town healed, nightmare over, until now. Because now, in 2025, the pattern has returned. The positioning, the white cloth, the eyes, the killings have started again. And unless Frank Duval has risen from the grave, then either we got the wrong man back in 2003, or someone else knew exactly how he did it. They say memories fade over time, that the sharp edges of a moment blur until all you're left with is a general feeling. A dusty photo in your head you can't quite focus on, but not this memory, not that day. The day they took Frank Duval away is one of the few memories I can still play back in my mind, frame by frame, like it's carved into the walls of my brain. I can tell you the exact color of the sky, the sound of gravel crunching under boot soles, the way the air smelled like dry pine and engine oil. It was the moment when Ridgway, after more than a year of fear and mourning, finally breathed again, and it was the first time I felt watched. The police didn't come in quietly. That afternoon, August 27th, 2003, the whole department showed up at Frank's trailer, just past the split in Bramble Road. 2 squad cars, a sheriff's cruiser, an unmarked van, guns drawn, radios crackling. They treated it like a raid, even though Frank never fought back, never shouted, never even tried to run. He was sitting on a broken lawn chair when they approached, drinking coffee from a chipped mug, still wearing his work boots. He raised his hands before they even spoke a word. My friend Ben and I were standing across the street when it happened. We'd heard the sirens and followed them, stupid and curious, like kids always are. People were starting to gather already. You'd be surprised how fast news travels in a small town. It's even faster when it's bad. The whole thing was over in minutes. Frank stood up, let them cuff him, didn't say a word, didn't look scared, didn't look angry, but he did look at me just before they pushed his head down to guide him into the back of the cruiser. He turned and looked right at me. His eyes didn't widen. He didn't blink. He just stared, like he recognized me, like he knew me, and for reasons I still can't explain, stared back. I don't know why that moment stayed with me for so long. At the time, I didn't think much of it. It's figured he looked around at whoever happened to be standing nearby. But now, looking back, that memory feels different. Like it means something. Like it was the first move in a game I didn't know I was playing later that night. My mom wouldn't stop crying. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the mug in front of me, not even touching the hot chocolate she'd made. She was on the couch with the TV on mute, watching the local news play the arrest on a loop. Over and over, the image of Frank being led to the cruiser, hands behind his back. Face unreadable. My dad kept saying the same thing under his breath. I don't know. I just don't know. He didn't believe it was over. He wouldn't say it out loud, not then, but I could see it in the way his jaw clenched, in how he kept locking the doors and checking the windows every half hour like he was waiting for someone to knock in the middle of the night. Frank was caught. Frank confessed and still didn't sleep. What no one told the town back then was how strange the confession actually was. I didn't find out until years later. Last I started working at the Ridgeway Gazette, our tiny local paper with creaky chairs and an office that smelled like old paper and coffee filters. I was sorting through boxes in the archive room, looking for a missing tax report from 2004 and stumbled on a file marked Duval Confession, internal use only. It wasn't police property. It's notes from a reporter named Harvey Quinn, who had passed away in 2009. Harvey was old school. He kept handwritten notebooks, not digital files, and his writing was barely legible. But I squinted through the scribbles and found a sentence that's haunted me ever since. Frank described scenes with precision, but never said, "I killed her." Always, she was there or she was found, almost like he was remembering, not admitting. He also noted that Frank seemed detached during the confession.com, too. Another line. Sheriff joked about Frank being the most helpful serial killer in history. No fight, no emotion, it's facts. And this one. Frank said, "They won't find the rest. They don't belong to me." Was he talking about other victims, other crimes? So that last quote sent chills down my spine. They don't belong to me. I read that line over and over again, sitting alone in the dim archive room while the fluorescent light above me buzzed like a dying fly. Was Frank covering for someone else? Or did he think he was just a witness? Or maybe he was. I took that notebook home with me. Still have it. I know I shouldn't. Technically, it belongs to the Gazette's records. But something about it felt personal. Like it was left for me to find. Or maybe, like Frank wanted someone to keep reading long after he was gone. For a long time, thought I was just spiraling, chasing ghosts, trying to make sense of something that already had a clean ending. But then, in 2025, when that body was found in the woods again, with the same white cloth on her chest, when the news confirmed that her eyes had been removed, when I saw the press conference and heard the sheriff call it an isolated incident, I knew deep down this wasn't over. It had never been over. And maybe it had never even started the way we thought it had. I didn't sleep much that night. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table with that same notebook in front of me, flipping pages until my fingers ached. I kept thinking about that look Frank gave me, that stare. It wasn't angry. It wasn't scared. It was knowing. And now I can't help but wonder, did Frank Duval know something about me? Was I just a kid standing in the crowd? Oh, was I always part of this story, even before I knew it had started? I've gone back to that day in my mind so many times, replayed it in slow motion, every officer, every neighbor, every shadow that moved where it shouldn't have. And that look Frank gave me, it still wakes me up some nights, because now, after everything, I can't shake the feeling that maybe he wasn't just looking at me. Maybe he was warning me. After Frank Duval's arrest, Ridgway didn't bounce back overnight. It didn't matter that the police called it an airtight case. It didn't matter that he confessed or that the sheriff got on television and told us we were safe again. That kind of fear, the kind that lives in your bones, doesn't disappear because someone tells you it's okay to come out now. We wanted to believe it. God, we needed to believe it. And for a while, we tried. There were signs of life returning. Little moments that felt like hope. The gas station stopped locking its doors during daylight hours. The apple orchard reopened to families. Its church attendance picked up again. You could hear kids playing outside in the evenings. Their laughter a little too loud, like they were trying to shout the fear away. But deep down, we all knew something was off, like we'd painted over a cracked wall and pretended the foundation was still solid. My own family changed in ways I didn't fully understand until years later. My mom threw herself into religion, not in the soft way she used to, lighting candles and humming hymns while folding laundry, but in a desperate, rigid kind of way. She started leaving little crosses around the house. One in my sock drawer, one taped to the back of the bathroom mirror. She said they were for protection. She never explained what exactly we were supposed to be protected from now that the killer was caught. My dad used to hum along to Johnny Cash while grilling burgers in the backyard, became a ghost in his own home. He stopped joking, stopped calling me champ. He'd just sit in the living room late at night with the TV turned low and the police scanner turned up, sipping cheap beer and staring at the wall like he was waiting for a voice to call out through the static. They didn't talk about Frank, ever, not even when his name came up on the news. It was like acknowledging him made the whole nightmare too real again. I'd lie awake in my bedroom, staring at the popcorn ceiling, listening to the creaks in the floorboards. Every time the house settled, I flinched. Every time the wind brushed against the windows, I held my breath. Even after the arrest, I never felt safe because some part of me, some deep, quiet part, didn't think we got the right guy. There were others who felt that way too. They didn't say it out loud, not in public, but you could hear it whispered between aisles at the grocery store. See it in the way people lowered their voices when talking about the case. I once overheard a woman at the pharmacy say, "It's like they just wanted anyone to blame." And then there were the details, the little inconsistencies that never made it into the newspapers, like how Frank's DNA was only ever found at one scene, the very last one, or how one of the victims had skin under her fingernails that didn't match Frank's profile and the sheriff chalked it up to contamination, or how Frank claimed he used a specific type of curtain cord to tie his victims. But investigators later discovered the material varied between some were nylon, some were cotton, minor things. Things you could overlook unless you were really paying attention, unless you couldn't stop thinking about it. Like me. The Gazette ran a front-page headline the week after the arrest, "Ridgway Heals." And for the next few years, that was the story we told ourselves. Frank Duval, loner, garbage man, the Ridgway Reaper. He was locked away. He was gone. We were free, but free felt a lot like pretending, like smiling through your teeth at a funeral because it's easier than letting the grief show. In the 10 years between Frank's arrest and his death in prison, Ridgway tried to forget. We tried to move on. The town even held a small memorial park, dedication for the victims in 2006. I remember standing near the back of the crowd that day, my hands jammed deep into my jacket pockets, feeling the cold air creep down my spine. The day unveiled a simple granite slab with the names of the 7 women engraved in clean, sharp letters: Angela, Laura, Maggie, Samantha, Vanessa, Jessica, Rachel. 7 names, 7 lives, 7 silent stories that no one ever really told. I stood there and stared at that stone for what felt like hours, long after the rest of the town wandered off for cider and cookies. I remember thinking how quiet it was, how even the birds didn't sing that day. And then, just as I was about to leave, I noticed something at the base of the memorial. Tucked just behind the flowers was a folded piece of white cloth. Perfectly square, perfectly clean. No one else saw it. I bent down, picked it up, turned it over in my hands. No writing, no markings, just fabric. I asked the groundskeeper later if he'd put it there. He shook his head, said he thought the wind must have blown it in from the chapel down the road, but something about it felt intentional, like a calling card or a reminder. Frank died in 2013, 10 years into his sentence. Heart failure, the papers said. No autopsy was requested. No next of kin listed. No visitors during his entire incarceration. His ashes were reportedly scattered in a state-owned lot just beyond the prison gates. He died alone, and with him, case, according to the sheriff's office, was finally closed for good. They even held a small press briefing. I remember watching it online from my apartment at college, volume low, chewing on a pencil like I was supposed to be studying for finals. The sheriff at the time, not the same man from the original investigation, stood stiffly behind a podium and said, "This town can rest easy knowing the man responsible is no longer with us." I wanted to believe him, I really did, but couldn't shake the memory of that folded cloth at the memorial.org away. Frank looked at me that day like he wasn't just being taken away, like he was leaving something behind. Years passed. I went to college, got a journalism degree, came back home, took a job at the Ridgeway Gazette, mostly because no one else wanted it. Life got quiet again. I wrote fluff pieces about pie contests and dog adoption events. Interviewed the town librarian about overdue book fines. Sat through planning commission meetings with 3 people in attendance. Normal stuff, boring stuff, safe stuff, until one morning in March of 2025, body was found near the old Ranger Trail. Same posture, same cords, same white cloth, and the fear came roaring back like it had never left. Just like that, Ridgeway remembered what it had tried to bury, and so did I, but this time, I wasn't just a kid watching from across the street. I was older, smarter, and more than anything. I was ready to finally find out what really happened, because if we were wrong about Frank, we let the real Ridgeway Reaper walk free 20 years ago, then that's not just a mistake. It's a secret someone wanted us to live with. And now that secret was bleeding its way back to the surface. I don't think I've ever driven out to the Ridgeway Ranger Trail that early in the morning before. The roads were slick from last night's rain. Fog clung low to the pavement like smoke from a dying fire. Every tree on the edge of the woods looked like it was watching me, leaning just slightly inward, as if it knew something was about to happen. I wasn't even supposed to be out there. The Gazette hadn't run a story yet. The cops hadn't released any statement to the public. But I knew a paramedic who owed me a favor, and when he called the newsroom in a panic, whispering, "You're not going to believe what they just pulled." Out of the woods, I was already grabbing my keys before he finished the sentence. I didn't bring a camera, didn't even think to bring a notepad. All I had was my phone and a feeling in my gut that this wasn't just another story. This was something worse, something familiar. The trailhead was already taped off by the time I got there. Yellow crime scene tape flapping in the wind like a warning. 3 cruisers were parked off the side of the gravel lot. A small Sachandrescu tent had been popped up, the kind they use when they expect to be there a while. A forensics van sat just beyond the tree line, cucked partially out of sight like it didn't want to be seen. I didn't recognize the lead detective. New blood, young, stern-faced, looked like the kind of guy who kept his badge polished and his emotions buried. I showed him my press credentials. He rolled his eyes. "Off limits," he said. "I'm not here to get in the way," I told him. "I just need to know if it's true." He looked at me sideways. "What do you think is true?" I hesitated, then asked it outright. "Was there a white cloth?" His jaw clenched. He didn't answer. Didn't have to. That silence told me everything. I watched from the perimeter, careful not to cross the tape. My friend, the paramedic who tipped me off, gave me a small nod from where he stood near the van. His gloves were off, but his hands still shook. That told me more than any official report ever could. The body had been found by two hikers college kids out on break, looking for mushrooms or something. They'd gone off trail to avoid a flooded section of the path and stumbled right into it. A woman, mid to late 20s, fully clothed, no shoes, laid flat on her back, arms crossed over her chest, eyes open, no blood, no signs of a struggle, just like the original victims. And there, folded neatly across her left wrist, was a clean, white square of fabric. I stood there staring at it until the coroner's team zipped her into a bag and loaded her into the wad van, even after she was gone. I couldn't stop looking at the spot where she'd been. I knew that silence. I had grown up with it by the time I got back to my car. My hands were trembling. I didn't drive straight home. Didn't go back to the office either. Instead, I parked at the edge of the high school track, staring out across the empty football field. I used to run laps there after school. I remember using that same field for a candlelight vigil after. Rachel's body was found in '03. People brought teddy bears and pictures. Some sang hymns. Most just cried. That same sick heaviness was pressing down on me again. But now, it was worse, because we were supposed to be done with this. Frank was dead, so who the hell did this? Later that afternoon, I found myself doing something I hadn't done in a long time. I pulled the cardboard box out from the back of my closet. It was old and dented, with tape curling off the corners. I'd labeled it 2003, do not open in red marker, back when I moved into my apartment. I always told myself I'd kept it just in case I ever wanted to write a book, but the truth was, I was never ready to throw it out. Inside were clippings, notes, photos I'd printed from the town archives. A copy of the original autopsy report for Jessica Tyler, one of the later victims. I'd stolen it from my internship file room my senior year of college. Terrified someone would notice, I'd kept everything, because part of me always knew it wasn't over. I spread everything across my living room floor, side dash by dash side. Each photo told a part of a larger story. Angela, the first victim, had been found near a dry creek bed. Laura was discovered behind an abandoned barn. Maggie, inside a drainage ditch. Different locations, but the same posture, the same eerie stillness. Always with that white cloth folded somewhere on the body, like a signature, like a message. Frank had admitted to all 7, but only gave real details about the final one, Rachel, and even those were vague, rehearsed, almost, like he'd memorized them from somewhere else. I pulled out the photo of Rachel's scene, then pulled up the photo I'd snapped on my phone that morning of the woman found in the woods. Same posture, same cord type, same wrist placement, same blank, peaceful expression on her face. It was like looking at the past repeating itself in real time, like a carbon copy of a nightmare. I didn't sleep that night. I laid on my couch with the photos spread out beside me, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw the woman's body again, and worse, I saw Rachel's beside it. I saw the others, too, like they were all waiting for me to figure something out. Like they were asking, why didn't you stop this? Why did we believe them? The next day, the official police press conference went public. I already knew what they were going to say. A lone incident. No confirmed links to the past murders. No evidence to suggest the 2003 case needed to be reopened. Just a tragedy. Just a coincidence. But they were wrong. I knew it in my bones. That woman in the woods wasn't an isolated crime. She was number 8. And if we didn't act fast, there'd be a number 9. The killer had waited 20 years, and now he was back. Or maybe, just maybe, he had never left. I spent the next 3 days living like I was under some kind of spell. I barely ate, barely slept, barely spoke to anyone. My phone buzzed constantly. Coworkers wanting to know if I was going to write a piece for the Gazette. Old friends asking if I was okay after the press release about the woman in the woods. Even my sister called twice just to make sure I wasn't slipping back into that same dark place I'd crawled out of years ago. I lied to all of them. I said I was fine. I said I was staying out of it, but that was nowhere near the truth. The truth was I was deep in it, deeper than I'd ever been before. It felt like the past was rising up from the grave and dragging me with it. That box of old documents and clippings had swallowed me whole, and for the first time in 2 decades, I wasn't just remembering what happened. I was trying to understand it, really, truly understand it. I started cross-referencing every detail from the original 7 murders. I laid out maps of each location on my living room floor. I used push pins and string like one of those deranged detectives in a TV crime drama, but it wasn't about theatrics. It was about patterns. I marked the spot where each girl was found. I noted the dates. I noted the days of the week, the weather, the moon cycle. I noted the names of the reporting officers, the lead detectives, the family statements, everything. And then I compared it all to the new murder, the Ridgway body. It's the woman with the white cloth on her wrist. Her name was Amanda Price, 20 years old, worked in the city, but had moved back to town to care for her sick father. She was last seen leaving the grocery store the night before her body was found. She'd called her dad around 9:15 p.m. and told him she'd be home in 20 minutes. She never made it. Sound familiar? It should, because that exact same story belonged to Laura Higgins back in 2003, almost word for word. I went digging into old court transcripts, old police files, anything I could get my hands on. I even rewatched Frank Deller's taped confession, the one they played in court when he pled guilty. And here's where things got weird, or rather worse, because in that confession, Frank described the burial site of victim number 5, Maggie Keene, in specific terms. He said she was laid down near a pile of rocks shaped like a cross, but according to the original crime scene photos, no such rocks were found. There was no cross, no marker, no indication Frank had ever been there. That detail was only included in the local paper's write-up, which had published an interview with the property owner 2 weeks after Maggie's body was found, meaning Frank could have read it, memorized it, and parroted it back during the confession. Hemadov. Never been there at all. That was the first time I let the possibility enter my mind. The possibility that Frank didn't do it. Or, at least, not alone. Maybe he was a patsy, a decoy. Maybe he had a role. Maybe he lured the girls out or helped cover things up. But it was possible someone else had done the actual killing. And now that someone else was back, still out there, still choosing, still hunting. I remembered the rumors, the ones people used to whisper in the halls of my high school back when everything first happened, about how the town had rushed the investigation, how there were inconsistencies in the timeline, how someone had pushed for a quick conviction so the community could move on. I'd been too young to understand politics back then. I was too close to it all. Now, though, I couldn't stop thinking about those whispers, and I started to ask myself the question I should have asked 20 years ago. What if we got the wrong man? That thought clawed at my brain all night. I'd lie awake, staring at my ceiling, wondering if Frank had just taken the fall for something he couldn't control. If maybe he was guilty of something, sure, but not everything. And if that was the case, then the real killer, the one with the white cloth and the quiet hands and the perfectly placed bodies, he'd never been caught. He'd just gone dormant. I tried reaching out to the original lead detective, a man named William Sorensen. He was retired now, lived in a trailer about 45 minutes outside town. When I called his landline, his wife answered and told me he didn't speak to reporters. I said I wasn't a reporter anymore, that I just had questions, personal questions. She paused a moment, then said softly, "You're not the first person to come asking." I asked her what she meant. She said, "Someone was here just last month asking about those old murders." I asked who it was. She didn't know, said he never gave his name. Just wore a dark coat, said he was doing research for a book, asked for Sorensen by name. That chilled me in a way I can't explain, because there was no book. No one had ever published anything about the case. It was buried quietly, but now someone else was stirring it back up, okay? And I had to wonder, was it just another curious outsider, okay? Or was the killer himself circling back, checking in, retracing old steps, making sure all his secrets were still safe? That night, I went back to the Gazette's archives and pulled a name I hadn't seen in 20 years. Someone who used to work alongside Sorensen, a younger officer back then, barely out of academy. His name was Evan Harker. According to the town records, he never left. I don't know what it was about the name Evan Harker that hit me so hard, but the second I read it, something inside me locked into place, like a puzzle piece that had been hovering just above the board for years and finally clicked down. He wasn't someone I remembered clearly from back then, not like Sorensen or the detectives, gave press briefings or showed up on the evening news. No, Harker had always been in the background, the face behind the main action, a younger man with a clipboard or a flashlight, always standing just outside the frame. But now, years later, his name came to the surface like a bubble rising from deep black water. And what bothered me more than anything else was how little there was about him. I looked up public records. Nothing. Social media. Nothing. Retirement announcements. Nothing. It was as if the man had never existed past 2005. Not dead. Not missing. Just ... Gone. Like a file wiped clean. I drove to the county records building the next morning and asked to see personnel files for past police department employees. The clerk was hesitant at first, but recognized my name from the Gazette and offered to help, figuring maybe I was working on a retrospective. I nodded, lied, and thanked her. Spent almost an hour combing through binders, microfilm, and old scanned PDFs, and finally, we found a mention. Evan J. Harker, hired 1999, transferred to Special Investigations Division in 2002, resigned quietly in May of 2004. That was less than a year after Frank Deller was convicted. There was no reason listed, no letter on file, just the word resigned typed into the system. No next of kin. No forwarding address. It was like he'd walked out of the building one day and disappeared. That didn't sit right with me. Cops don't just quit in silence after being involved in a high-profile serial killer case, not unless something went very wrong. I started asking around. I called some old Gazette staffers who'd been there longer than me, people who'd worked the Deller case hard in those final months. Most of them gave me the same answer. They vaguely remembered Harker, but didn't know where he went. One guy, a former crime reporter named Jay Holt, paused longer than the rest when I mentioned the name. He said, "Yeah, I remember Evan. Weird dude, quiet, always watching." When I asked him what happened to him, Jay got even quieter. He said, "You really want to go down this rabbit hole? 'Cause I did, and it messed me up for a while." I told him I was already down it. Jay sighed and told me he'd looked into Harker back in 2007 after hearing a rumor that he'd turned in evidence during the case that never made it into the court proceedings. Apparently, there was talk that Harker had found an eighth body. It's not officially documented. It's never released to the public. One of the search dogs found it during a secondary sweep of the Milner property, a shallow grave near a broken-down fence line. But by the time backup arrived, the grave was empty. Nothing but disturbed dirt and a few scraps of cloth. Harker supposedly filed a preliminary report, but then it vanished. Jay tried to chase the story, but doors started slamming in his face. One of his sources, a female dispatcher who'd taken Harker's call the night he claimed to find the grave, stopped returning his messages. A week later, she quit and moved out of state. Jay said he finally dropped it after someone slashed his tires and left a white handkerchief tied to his doorknob. I asked him if he still had the file. He didn't. Said it was stolen from his garage, along with 2 other boxes of notes, never recovered. I didn't know what to make of that, but I knew one thing. I needed to find Evan Harker. I started calling every Harker in the state directory. Dozens of them. Most were dead ends, but then I found one in E.J. Harker, listed as a part-time groundskeeper for a private cemetery about 90 minutes outside of town. The listing was old, from 2018, but it was the closest thing to a lead I'd had. I drove there the next morning. The place was small, tucked into a hillside, surrounded by trees so thick they felt like walls. It was one of those cemeteries with tilted headstones and rusted gates, the kind of place people forget exists until they're burying someone no one else will visit. I walked through the entrance and asked the man in the office if Evan was around. He looked confused for a moment, then said, "You mean the quiet guy who used to live in the trailer out back?" My heart jumped. I nodded. "Yeah," I said, "that's him." The man scratched his head and said he left about a year ago. Didn't say where. Just packed up and vanished. Of course he did. I asked if he'd left anything behind. The man shrugged. Not really. Just a shed full of junk. Old books, some clothes, nothing useful. I asked if I could see it. He hesitated, then waved me toward the back path. "Sure. Just don't make a mess." The shed was barely standing. The door creaked when I opened it. Inside was dust and rot in broken crates. But on the far wall was a pinboard just like mine. Maps, articles, photocopies of evidence tags, newspaper clippings with certain names circled, 7 names, and an 8th, one I had never seen before. E. Langston, age 19, missing 2002. I'd never heard of her, never seen her in any reports. I took a photo of the board and shut the shed door behind me. As I walked back to my car, my mind was spinning. Harker had been hunting someone. Still was. Maybe he found something he wasn't supposed to. Maybe he knew the truth, the whole truth, and got out before someone made him disappear like that 8th body. And now I was standing in the exact same footprints, the same dirt, the same fear. Only difference was I wasn't sure I'd get out. After the visit to the dilapidated shed and that disturbing discovery on Evan Harker's pinboard, I knew there was no turning back. The name E. Langston haunted me more than any other. Who was she? Why had she vanished in 2002, just before the murder stopped? And why had no one ever mentioned her? Dove headfirst into searching every public and private record I could find, missing persons reports, cold case files, even old yearbooks from the Ridgeway High School archives. Nothing. Concrete surfaced at first, but the more I looked, the more the pieces started to fit together in an unsettling way. Elizabeth Langston, a quiet, shy girl who had dropped out in her junior year and moved away shortly before her disappearance. No family reported her missing. No local news coverage, like she'd simply evaporated. But what caught my attention was the fact that Elizabeth had been seen last near the old Milner property, the same place where Frank Duval's victims had been found. I started pulling in people who had known her, classmates, teachers, neighbors. The stories didn't add up. Some claimed she'd been scared of someone. Others said she talked about dark things happening near the woods. One teacher told me Elizabeth had confided in her about a man who'd been following her, but the school dismissed it as paranoia. No police report was ever filed, and so her disappearance slid into the cracks of Ridgway's collective memory, forgotten and ignored. But why? But why? Why did the town seem to sweep her away so easily? And why did that name appear on Evan Harker's board, linked to the killings? I knew I needed to talk to Harker himself, at least someone who might know what happened to him. I contacted the sheriff's department again and requested interviews with retired officers who worked the case. Most stonewalled me or said it was all closed. No comment till I reached a woman named Carol Myers, a retired forensic analyst who had been one of the few female staff members on the team back in 2003. Carol agreed to meet me at a coffee shop near town, a quiet place filled with cracked vinyl booths and the smell of old books. When I showed her the photo of Harker's penboard, her hands trembled. She whispered that Evan had come to her privately in 2004, terrified and exhausted. He told her he had found evidence that didn't fit the official story of evidence, that someone else was involved. Someone high up in the community, someone who had been protecting the real killer. Carol warned me to be careful, that some secrets in Ridgway weren't just buried, they were booby-trapped. That if I pushed too hard, I might disappear like Elizabeth Langston. I thanked her and left with more questions than answers. The shadows felt longer now, like eyes were watching me from every corner, waiting to see how far I'd go. I began to realize the story I thought I was chasing wasn't just about a serial killer. It was about a town willing to protect its own darkness, even if it meant sacrificing the truth and maybe even lives. I sat back in my apartment late that night, staring at the photo of that white cloth again, wondering how many more bodies lay hidden, how many stories went untold, and how much longer the killer's silence would last before it screamed again. After meeting Carol Myers, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking on thin ice. The walls of Ridgway seemed to be closing in, and every face in town carried a shadow of something unspoken. I started noticing small things, furtive glances from neighbors, hushed conversations that abruptly stopped when I entered a room. Phone calls cut short when I picked up. It was like the entire town had made a silent pact to keep the past buried, no matter how deep the dirt or how many bodies it took to cover it up. Then, one afternoon, just when I thought I had nowhere left to turn, I received an anonymous envelope slipped under my apartment door. Inside was a single sheet of paper with one sentence typed in shaky, uneven letters. "Stop digging or you'll be the next to vanish." No signature, no return address, just a warning. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to push the fear down, but it bubbled up every time I closed my eyes. I thought about Elizabeth Langston, about Evan Harker, about Carol Myers' trembling hands, and about the killer who had slipped through our fingers all those years ago. I thought about the white cloth, folded so precisely, and what it meant: a calling card, a message, or maybe a curse. The next morning, I went back to the Milner property, the heart of all the nightmares, and met with a local historian named Mary Collins, a woman who had lived in Ridgway her whole life and was known for collecting town secrets and old photographs. She showed me faded Polaroids of the property from the early 2000s, grown paths, the broken fences, and one photograph that stopped me cold, a grainy black and white snapshot of a figure standing near the woods. Face obscured, but unmistakably watching. Mary whispered that locals called him the Watcher, a ghost story twisted from real fear, but she believed it was more than legend, that someone was still out there, waiting. I started connecting the dots between the missing girls, the sudden resignations, and the whispered threats. Someone high up had silenced evidence, moved bodies, and manipulated the investigation. I was too close, too loud. The night I left Mary's house, I noticed a car slowly following me down the long dirt road to my apartment. Its headlights flickered off and on, disappearing behind trees, reappearing at intersections. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. But inside, I knew this was no longer just a story to tell. It was a danger to survive. As I lay awake again that night, I realized the truth. The past never really dies in a town like Ridgeway. Tia lurks just beneath the surface, wrapped in silence and fear. And when it comes back, it's not just for the victims. It's for everyone who dared to remember. The days after that car started following me felt like living in a nightmare stretched thin over every hour of sunlight. Every knock on my door made me jump. Every stranger's stare felt like a dagger in my back. I kept telling myself to stay focused, to keep chasing the story, but the fear was real and growing. I started digging into Ridgeway's history more than ever, searching for connections between the disappearances and the people who had power. Back then, local officials, business owners, and law enforcement who might have had reasons to cover things up. One name kept surfacing in whispers and old news clippings: Charles Renner, wealthy landowner and former city councilman who had passed away quietly in 2011. Renner had owned a large portion of the land near Lemare property and was rumored to have ties to some of Ridgeway's darker dealings. His family kept their distance from the town after his death, but his influence lingered like a ghost. I managed to track down Renner's granddaughter, a woman named Clara, who still lived in Ridgeway. She was reluctant to talk at first, defensive even. But after I showed her some of the photos and articles I'd collected, her walls crumbled as Clara revealed that her grandfather had been obsessed with the woods near the Milner farm, often taking long walks there alone, muttering about keeping things in order. She believed he'd known more about the murders than anyone had admitted. More than that, she hinted there were letters and journals hidden somewhere in the family home, things that could expose long-buried secrets. As we spoke, I noticed something: a tight, faint scar along Clara's wrist, almost like a faint mark left by a tightly tied cord. When I asked about it, she quickly changed the subject, but that image stayed with me. It was too much like the calling card left on every victim. Was it coincidence or a warning? That night, with Clara's cryptic words ringing in my ears, I decided I needed to see the Renner estate for myself. The house stood on a hill overlooking the town, a sprawling Victorian mansion with boarded-up windows and wild ivy crawling up the stone walls. As I stood at the rusted iron gate, the wind picked up, and the branches cast eerie shadows that danced like specters across the ground. I felt eyes on me. It's not just the eyes of the town watching, but something darker, older. I forced the gate open and stepped inside. The air smelled of dust and secrets. Inside, I found the house frozen in time, furniture draped in white sheets, old newspapers scattered on the floor, and framed portraits of stern-faced ancestors staring down at me. In the library, behind a loose panel in the bookshelf, I discovered a small box filled with letters and journals, handwritten notes that detailed meetings with local officials, cryptic references to the necessity of silence, and chilling mentions of the pact. The entry spoke of someone who had to be stopped, but also warned that the cost of truth is blood. Reading those words, I understood the stakes. This wasn't just a serial killer hiding in the woods. This was a conspiracy, a shadow network that had protected a killer for decades and maybe was still protecting him now. As I turned to leave, a sudden noise made me freeze, a floorboard creaking upstairs, a whisper of movement. I wasn't alone. The house held its breath, and so did I. Heart pounding, I stayed perfectly still, listening to the faint sound above me, the subtle creak of footsteps, like someone pacing the floorboards, searching or waiting. The heavy silence in the Renner estate was oppressive, thick enough to choke on. I debated running, but something routed me to that spot, a mix of fear, curiosity, and a stubborn need to uncover the truth that had haunted this town for over 2 decades. Slowly, I edged toward the grand staircase, the wooden steps groaning under my careful weight. Each footfall seemed loud enough to wake ghosts. Halfway up, I spotted a shadow flicker across a cracked window pane, and my breath caught in my throat. Whoever or whatever was here, they knew I was coming. The second floor smelled musty, the wallpaper peeling in long strips, revealing decades of dust and decay underneath. I moved quietly through a long hallway lined with faded portraits, whose eyes seemed to follow me, judging, warning. At the end of the hall was a door slightly ajar. From the narrow gap, I could hear the faint murmur of voices, slow, indistinct, but urgent. My hands trembled as I pushed the door open just enough to peer inside. There, around a small table illuminated by a single flickering candle, were 3 figures. Their faces were obscured by shadows, but I recognized something in their posture, calm, deliberate, in control. They spoke in hushed tones, and one of them held a folded white cloth, the same eerie signature left at the crime scenes. I couldn't make out the words clearly, but phrases like "the pattern must continue," and "no mistakes this time" floated through the room. My heart raced as I realized I had stumbled on something far worse than a lone killer. A group, a conspiracy, alive and active, orchestrating horrors that had haunted Ridgeway for generations. Suddenly, a floorboard behind me cracked sharply. The 3 figures froze, heads snapping toward the door. Panic surged through me. I bolted down the hall and crashed through the front door, bursting into the cold night air. Branches whipped my face as I ran across the overgrown lawn, not daring to look back until I was safely inside my car. Sitting there, shaking and breathless, I understood the terrifying truth. The nightmare had never ended. It was still here, watching, waiting, and planning its next move. And now, I was a part of it. The town's silence was no accident. It was a shield forged from fear, corruption, and blood. I knew I had to keep going to expose the dark heart of Ridgeway. But I also knew I wasn't just chasing a story anymore. I was running from a shadow that wanted me to disappear, just like Elizabeth Langston. Just like Evan Harker. The house that watched back was no longer just a place, it was a warning, and I had ignored it. After that terrifying night at the Renner estate, everything changed. I couldn't pretend this was just a story anymore. I was in the middle of something far bigger and darker than I'd ever imagined. I started noticing things I'd missed before. Strange cars parked outside my apartment. Unfamiliar faces watching from a distance. The sound of footsteps just outside my door when I was certain I was alone. My phone calls went unanswered, my emails ignored. Even some of my closest friends started avoiding me, their eyes darting nervously whenever I brought up the case. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, jumping at every creak and shadow. I felt hunted. I knew I was. I went back through the journals from the Renner house over and over, searching for clues, trying to piece together what this pact was and who was behind it. The writings hinted at powerful people, local officials, police, business leaders who had covered for the killer to protect their own interests. But what terrified me most was the sense that the killer was still out there, watching me, waiting for me to slip up. Then, one night, I got a call from an unknown number. A man's voice whispered only 3 words, "Stop digging," and the line went dead. I reported the call to the police, but they brushed it off, telling me it was probably a prank. I wasn't so sure. The threats were real, and so was the danger. I began digging deeper into the original investigation, focusing on Evan Harker. The more I learned, the more it seemed he had gotten too close to the truth and paid the price for it. I contacted one of his old colleagues, a detective named Mark Lewis, who agreed to meet me in secret. Over coffee, in a dimly lit diner, Mark revealed that Harker had confided in him about finding evidence of a second killer, someone who didn't fit the profile Frank Deller had matched. He warned me to be careful, saying that some in Ridgeway wanted those secrets buried forever. As I left the diner, I felt the weight of those words settle on my shoulders. I was no longer just a reporter. I was a target, and the shadows were closing in faster than ever before. The days following my meeting with Detective Mark Lewis felt like I was sinking deeper into quicksand. Every step pulling me closer to a place I wasn't sure I'd escape from. The tension around me grew thick, and suffocating friends who once answered my calls now avoided me like I was carrying a disease. Neighbors who used to smile turned their backs when I walked by, and strange cars kept appearing in my parking lot late at night, their engines idling just long enough for me to glimpse the tinted windows before they sped off. One morning, I found my apartment door unlocked, the lock tampered with, and inside, subtle but unmistakable signs that someone had been there. Papers moved, photos disturbed, my private notes rifled through. That night, I decided to install a security camera outside my door, hoping to catch whoever was stalking me. What it recorded chilled me to the bone. A shadowy figure standing in the hall at 3 a.m., staring straight at my door before disappearing down the corridor. I sent the footage to the police, but they said there was nothing they could do without a clear image. The feeling of being watched only grew, and sleep became a stranger. Every time my phone rang, my heart leapt, expecting the call to come back. Same cold voice with its half-uttered threats. Then came the letters typed on old-fashioned typewriters, their pages crisp but filled with chilling messages. Remember, Elizabeth, the pact must be kept. Silence is safety. I pinned each note to my wall, watching the pattern emerge, but instead of reassurance, it only fueled my paranoia. Desperate for answers, I reached out to the families of the original victims, hoping they might shed light on what the town had hidden so well. Some refused to talk, locked behind years of grief and mistrust, but a few were willing to meet. One woman, Mrs. Wilkins, whose daughter was among those lost, handed me a faded photograph of a young man she'd met briefly at a community meeting after the murders. She said his name was Harker, and that he seemed scared, almost haunted. That frightened look she described matched everything I had heard about Evan. It dawned on me that I was tracing the steps of a man who had vanished, perhaps because he knew the truth and because that truth had deadly consequences. I realized then that the killer wasn't just a lone predator, but part of something much larger, a network of silence that protected him for years. And now, with my digging, that network was tightening around me like a noose. The story I thought I was chasing had turned into a fight for survival where every whisper, every shadow might be my last. The pressure was crushing me from all sides, and just when I thought I might break, an unexpected call came that changed everything. It was from a man named Daniel Price, the brother of Amanda Price, the woman found in the woods this year. Kay's voice was raw, edged with grief and anger, but also something else, hope. He said he'd been following the case quietly, trying to piece together what had happened to his sister. But the official investigation had stalled, and the police refused to connect her death to the old murders. Daniel told me he wanted to meet, in person, to share what he'd uncovered on his own. When we met in a quiet cafe on the edge of town, he handed me a folder filled with his notes, old letters Amanda had kept, and photographs no one else had seen. Among the papers was a diary entry where Amanda wrote about a man who had been stalking her. Someone she feared was watching her every move. His description was vague, but chilling. He was always just out of sight, but she had noticed a distinctive ring he wore, shaped like a serpent. That detail stuck with me because I had come across a similar symbol in one of Evan Harker's journals. A ring, a serpent, something that had been referenced cryptically as the mark of the pact. Daniel and I spent hours talking, piecing together timelines and uncovering connections that the police hadn't wanted to acknowledge. He told me about secret meetings his sister had attended, groups of people who were obsessed with cleansing the town of what they saw as impurities, people like Amanda, like Elizabeth, like the other victims. The more we dug, the clearer it became. Amanda hadn't been just a random victim. She'd stumbled onto something too big, too dangerous. And that's why she'd been silenced. That night, as I walked home with Daniel's folder tucked under my arm, I felt eyes on me again. I thought I heard footsteps behind me, but when I looked back, there was only the empty street and the distant glow of streetlights. Still, the feeling didn't leave. It was the same feeling I'd had ever since I started chasing this story. The feeling that the shadows weren't just shadows, but watching, waiting. And now, with Amanda's brother by my side, I knew we were closer than ever to uncovering the truth. But I also knew one thing with terrifying certainty. The closer we got, the more dangerous it would become. The pact was real. The silence was deadly. And the nightmare was far from over. After meeting Daniel Price and going through the folder he'd compiled, I realized that everything I thought I knew was just scratching the surface. The pact mentioned in Evan Harker's journals and referenced in Amanda Stalker's ring wasn't some vague idea. It was real. A twisted secret society that had controlled Ridgeway for decades. The more I looked, the more I uncovered connections between prominent families, law enforcement, and local businesses that had all quietly supported each other while covering up the murders and disappearances. The name Charles Renner kept popping up everywhere. His influence reached far beyond the estate on the hill. Apparently, Renner had been the founder, or at least a major figure in this group, which seemed dedicated to maintaining control over the town, no matter the cost. I began meeting with people who had once been on the periphery of this network, former employees, old friends of Evan Harker, even retired judges who now lived quietly out of town. Each conversation chipped away at the facade of Ridgeway's quaint, small-town innocence. They spoke of threats, intimidation, and unexplained deaths among those who dared to question the group. One woman told me that Evan Harker had tried to expose the pact, handing over documents to trusted officials. But those people vanished or were silenced before anything could come to light. I realized Evan's resignation wasn't a simple quitting, it was a desperate escape. Every step I took, I felt the eyes of that network watching, waiting to see if I'd stumble or back down. But I couldn't stop. Not now. Daniel and I started mapping out the timeline of killings and disappearances, comparing them to meetings of the local council and other secret gatherings rumored to have happened in Ridgeway's darkest corners. The patterns lined up with chilling precision, showing that every victim had been someone who threatened to expose or disrupt the pact. I found references to symbols like the serpent ring in old police files, and even in the town's archived newspapers, hidden in the margins or in coded language. As Daniel and I dug deeper, we uncovered a chilling theory that the new murders weren't random at all, but calculated moves to restart the cycle of control, to remind the town who was really in charge. I realized with growing dread that the killer's return was a signal, a deliberate message to anyone brave enough to uncover the truth. The nightmare wasn't just about one man or even one group. It was about a town's darkest sins coming back to claim those who dared to remember. And with every secret uncovered, the danger grew. We were now in a race against a silence so deep and so powerful, it threatened to swallow us whole. By the time I reached chapter 17 in this nightmarish story, I was no longer just a curious investigator. I was a hunted man, caught in a deadly game far beyond my control. After days of constant fear, I realized the network shielding the killer wasn't just about power, it was about survival. People had died to keep this pact secret, and now I was on their list. One evening, while reviewing old documents in my apartment, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You've seen too much. Stop now, or you'll be next." My blood ran cold. I had no idea who was watching, but the threat was clear. I started taking precautions, changing my routine, installing extra locks, and staying with Daniel whenever I could. But it wasn't enough. My paranoia grew as strange things happened around me. My car was vandalized, my mail tampered with, and one night, a rock smashed through my living room window. I knew the people behind this weren't bluffing. The closer I got to the truth, the more desperate they became. I reached out to Carol Myers again, hoping she could provide some guidance. She urged me to find Evan Harker, not just to understand what he knew, but to possibly get his help. She mentioned rumors that he'd been seen recently hiding out in a remote cabin far outside Ridgeway. Daniel and I prepared to leave immediately, but that night I received a call from Clara Renner. She was frantic, warning me that someone had broken into her home and stolen the journals we'd found in the Renner estate. "They're watching us," she whispered. "You have to be careful." The next morning, Daniel and I set out for the cabin. The road was rough, winding through dense woods that seemed to close in around us. Every shadow felt like a threat, every rustle a warning. When we finally arrived, the cabin was dark and silent, but signs of recent habitation were clear cigarette butts, a half-empty cup of coffee, and scrawled notes pinned to the door. We waited, tense and on edge, until finally the door creaked open. Evan Harker stood there, roller, worn, but with eyes that still burned with determination. He didn't say a word at first, just nodded as if he'd been expecting us. That moment marked a turning point. For the first time, I felt like we might have a chance to break the silence, to expose the truth that had haunted Ridgeway for years. But deep down, I knew the road ahead was more dangerous than ever, because the pact wasn't just a secret, it was a living force. It would stop at nothing to protect itself. Evan Harker wasn't the man I'd imagined from old reports or distant memories. He was older, grayer, and worn by years of running, hiding, and bearing a burden no one else could understand. When we finally sat down inside that small, cramped cabin, the weight of everything he knew pressed down like a physical force. His voice was low and hoarse as he began to unravel the truth, piece by painful piece. He told us how he'd started in the Ridgeway police force with hope and determination, leaned to be swallowed by the darkness that had always lurked beneath the town's surface. He spoke of the pact, how it had formed decades earlier among influential men who believed they were protecting the town by controlling who lived and who died. He confessed that Frank Deller had been a convenient scapegoat, so when the pact used to shield themselves while continuing their twisted work in secret. Evan had tried to fight back, to gather evidence and bring the truth to light. But every step he took was met with silence, threats, and violence. When he discovered the hidden graves and the erased evidence, he knew his life was at risk. He had no choice but to resign and disappear, hoping the story would die with him. But now, with the murders starting again, it was clear the pact was alive and active, more dangerous than ever. Evan revealed that Amanda Price's murder was a message, a warning to anyone who dared to dig too deep. The white cloth tied to her wrist, the signature of the killer, was also a symbol of the pact's control, a mark to remind the town who was really in charge. He told us about Elizabeth Langston, a girl who had gotten too close to uncovering the truth and had paid with her life. Evan's eyes burned with pain and regret as he explained how the conspiracy's reach extended into every part of Ridgeway, from law enforcement and politics to local businesses and even some families I've known all my life. We listened in stunned silence as Evan pulled out a worn notebook filled with names, dates, and cryptic notes, proof of the pact's existence and its ongoing influence. He warned us that exposing these secrets would be a dangerous game, one that could cost us everything. Yet, he also said that the silence had to be broken, that the town deserved the truth no matter the price. Sitting there in that cabin, I realized the nightmare was no longer just about a serial killer. It was about a town's soul being held hostage by fear, corruption, and violence. And we were the last hope to set it free. With Evan's revelations still fresh in my mind, the urgency of our situation pressed down on me like never before. The pact wasn't just a shadowy rumor, it was a living, breathing force that was tightening its grip on Ridgeway, Daniel, Evan. And I knew that if we didn't act fast, more lives would be lost, and the truth would be buried forever. We started compiling all the evidence notes, journals, photos, and the testimonies we'd collected into one file that could not be ignored. But every step we took seemed to be met with resistance. Phone lines went dead just as we tried to make calls. Our emails bounced back. Someone was watching, listening, making sure we stayed in the dark. One night, while working late at my apartment, I heard the faint scrape of something being dragged outside. I looked out the window just in time to see a black van speeding away into the fog. I knew it wasn't random. We were being warned. Despite the danger, we decided to confront Clara Renner, hoping she might have more answers or a way to expose the pact. Meeting her felt like walking into a storm. Clara was scared, but resolute, as she told us that after the journals had been stolen, she found a hidden compartment in her grandfather's desk containing a map marked with locations tied to the pact's meetings and crimes. With this map, we might finally expose the full extent of the conspiracy. But time was running out. Soon after, Amanda Price's case was reopened, but the investigation was slow and frustratingly obstructed at every turn. We realized that the pact's influence was still strong in law enforcement and local government. They had no intention of letting the truth come out easily. Every night felt like a countdown. Every shadow might be the last. I thought about Elizabeth Langston, Amanda Price, and all the victims who had been silenced. Their stories pushed me forward. We had to break the cycle. We had to shine a light so bright that the darkness would have nowhere left to hide. But as we prepared to go public, Kai couldn't shake the feeling that the pact was ready for us, that it would strike again. And this time, there might be no escape. As we stood on the brink of exposing Ridgeway's darkest secrets, the weight of years of fear, silence, and pain hung heavy around us. The evidence was there, clear and damning, but so was the threat. We knew the pact wouldn't go down without a fight. The night before, we planned to release everything to the public. I barely slept. Every creak of my apartment, every shadow outside my window felt like a warning. Daniel and Evan were with me, their faces grim but determined. We gathered in my living room, going over the files one last time, knowing that once this story was out, there would be no turning back. The next morning, I uploaded the documents, videos, and interviews to a secure server and sent the links to trusted journalists and human rights groups. Almost immediately, the story exploded. Ridgeway was forced into the spotlight it had long avoided, and the town's underbelly was revealed for all to see. Pact's members scrambled, some denying everything, others fleeing or resigning in disgrace. But even as justice seemed within reach, the cost became clear. Threats escalated. Our phones rang with silent calls. Cars followed us down dark streets. One evening, a message appeared on my doorstep, a single white cloth, folded neatly, a chilling reminder that the pact still watched, still controlled. But despite the danger, we had done what no one else dared. We broke the silence. The victims were finally remembered. The town began to heal, slowly and painfully. Evan, Daniel, and I kept fighting, helping authorities track down those still involved and supporting the families left behind. Ridgeway was scarred, but it was no longer a place where darkness could hide forever. And as I look back on this journey from the first clue to the final revelation, I know that the truth was worth every risk. Because sometimes To stop a nightmare, you have to wake up the whole town. Story 2. It started with a knock I didn't hear. I had just gotten back from the grocery store, arms full of bags, fumbling with keys and mail, when I noticed it sitting there right on my porch. A plain brown box, about the size of a shoebox. No return address, no markings, nothing to indicate who sent it. Just my name, typed neatly on a shipping label, like it had been printed by someone who wanted to keep things impersonal. My name and my address. I didn't order anything. No birthdays coming up, no holidays around the corner. I hadn't even told anyone I was home. The whole thing felt off immediately, like it had been placed there, not delivered. There was no delivery slip, no Amazon tape, no UPS sticker, just the box, sealed with thin, clear tape, like someone had packed it in a hurry or didn't care to do it right. I stood there on the porch for a long moment, just staring at it, like it was going to start ticking or leak something foul. My heart picked up, but I told myself I was being paranoid. People get mail all the time, weird mail, junk, mistaken deliveries, but my name was spelled exactly right first and last. I didn't want to bring it inside, but curiosity overrode caution. I peeled the tape back with my keys, sitting on the floor just inside my front door, with a box between my knees, sunlight still filtering through the window beside me. It wasn't heavy, but it wasn't light either. There was something solid, and there's something that shifted slightly when I tilted the box. The first thing I saw when I opened it was the plastic bag, a large, clear Ziploc bag, the kind you'd use for freezing leftovers, but this one held something metal, sharp and deeply stained. It took me less than a second to recognize it. A hunting knife, a long one, thick handle, curved blade, worn edge. I knew that knife. My whole body went cold. I dropped the box, shoved myself away from it, back hitting the wall behind me like I'd been punched. I stared at it from across the entryway, like it might lunge at me. That knife wasn't just familiar, it was specific. It had a nick in the handle, right near the rivet. A scratch across the blade, diagonal and deep. I'd last seen it 7 years ago. I'd last seen it covered in blood. I hadn't thought about that night in years, not really. Told myself I'd moved on. I'd buried it, literally and mentally. But here it was again. In a sealed plastic bag, inside a box with no return address, delivered to my doorstep like a gift from the past, or a threat. And I knew something then, deep in my bones, in a way that didn't need proof. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't some weird coincidence. Someone knew. Someone had that knife. Someone had sent it to me, which could only mean one thing. Someone had been there that night. Someone saw what happened, and they'd been waiting, watching, for 7 long years. My hands were shaking too hard to call anyone. Not that I could explain this to the police, not without telling them everything. Hey, and I had promised I would never do that. We had all promised. But the promise didn't mean anything now. Not with that knife sitting in my hallway like a quiet accusation. My first thought wasn't even who sent it. My first thought was why now? I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I left the box sitting exactly where I'd opened it, too afraid to touch it again, as if just holding it a second time might trigger something, memories, guilt, maybe even a curse. My mind wouldn't stop racing, spiraling through every possibility like a maze with no exits. Who sent it? Why now? What did they want from me? But more than anything, one question kept clawing at the edge of my sanity. How did they get the knife? I hadn't seen it since that night in the woods, the night I thought I'd left everything behind. We were just kids back then, 17 and reckless, trying to have one last thrill before graduation. There were 5 of us, me, Carly, Dev, Mason, and Bree. We weren't bad kids, just bored and looking for something that felt dangerous without actually being dangerous. But that's the thing about danger. It doesn't wait for an invitation. It finds you. That night, we went out to a stretch of forest behind Mason's uncle's cabin. A place we weren't supposed to be. A place where the trees grew thick and the stars vanished behind a canopy of shadow. We were drinking, laughing, telling stupid ghost stories around a small fire we'd built in a makeshift pit. Dev had brought the knife, the same one in the box, to carve into bark and pretend we were survivors or hunters or something else far more important than we were. The mood shifted sometime after midnight. The wind changed. The laughter died down. Bree swore she heard something moving out there. Mason teased her. Carly tried to be brave. But we all felt it, that sudden change in the air. The electric sense that something was wrong. That's when we saw him. A man. Or what we thought was a man. Tall, thin, too still to be natural. He was standing just beyond the tree line, watching us. No flashlight, no phone, no reason to be there. His clothes were ragged and his eyes gone. I'll never forget his eyes were wide and lifeless, like he wasn't seeing us at all. Or maybe he was seeing something else entirely. Dev shouted at him. The man didn't move. Mason picked up a branch and threw it. The man didn't flinch. Then he stepped forward, and we all scrambled back when it turned violent. It happened so fast I couldn't process it. 1 second we were yelling. The next there was screaming. The man lunged at Carly, knife in his hand, or maybe it was a shard of glass. Dev tackled him. Mason tried to help. The struggle. Our knife, one we'd brought, ended up in someone's hand. I don't remember whose. Maybe mine. KB Dev's. All I remember is blood. So much blood. And the sound it made hitting the dirt. We killed him. I'm not even sure who landed the final blow. Maybe we all did. Maybe none of us did. And he just bled out there in the pine needles while we stood in shock. We didn't call the police. We didn't tell anyone. We buried the body in a shallow grave near a dry creek bed and made a pact to forget it ever happened. We told ourselves he attacked us. We told ourselves it was self-defense. We told ourselves no one would miss him. And for years, it seemed like we were right. Nothing came of it. No cops, no missing person reports. We all went our separate ways. College, jobs, adult lives layered over that one terrible night. And now, here I was, standing in my kitchen, staring at the edge of that same blade through plastic, feeling 17 again, helpless, dirty, and afraid. I knew I had to talk to the others. I hadn't spoken to Carly in years. Tev moved out west. Mason disappeared off social media. Bree never wanted to talk about it again. But if someone had that knife, if someone knew what we did, then this wasn't over. Someone had dug it up. Someone was trying to bring it back. And I couldn't help but feel like this was just the beginning. It's like we were all being watched again, judged, hunted, because the man we killed might have stayed buried, but the past never does. I don't know what I expected when I called Carly after all those years, but I wasn't ready for the sound of her voice. It had the same sharp edge it used to, but it was brittle now, worn down, like time hadn't been kind to her. When I told her about the package, I expected shock or disbelief, maybe even denial, but instead, there was this long pause. Just silence hanging heavy on the line, and then she whispered, "It found you too." That stopped me cold. "What do you mean too?" I asked, but she didn't answer right away. "Okay." She was breathing hard, like she'd been waiting for this moment, dreading it. Then she told me something that made my skin crawl. She'd gotten her own package 2 days earlier. Hers hadn't contained the knife. It had a Polaroid, a photo we thought we had destroyed years ago. It showed all of us in the woods, just after it happened, just before we buried him. We were blood-stained, pale, panicked. We didn't even know someone had taken it. Carly said the photo had no note, no name, Just her own address scrawled on the back in red marker, and the words, "Remember me." That was when I realized this wasn't just about me. This was happening to all of us, or at least whoever was left. I hung up and immediately started trying to contact the others. Dev didn't pick up, and his voicemail was full. Sent a dozen texts, nothing. Mason's number was dead, not even a voicemail greeting. I searched his name online, but all I found was an old article from a small town newspaper out west. Unidentified body found in burned out trailer. No name, no photo, just a vague description that could have been anyone, but something about it made my stomach twist. Mason had always talked about going off-grid, getting lost. Maybe he succeeded, or maybe someone made sure he stayed lost. Reached out to Bree last. Hadn't spoken to her since the week after it happened. She'd shut down completely after that night. Wouldn't even make eye contact in class. Transferred schools halfway through senior year. I found her on Facebook under a married name. Her profile was almost empty, but I sent a message anyway. She replied in less than 5 minutes. Her message was short. "Come to my house tonight. We need to talk." I drove 3 hours to get there. Her place was small, tucked into a quiet neighborhood. It's a kind of suburban street that looked safe, but always felt a little too quiet, like it was holding its breath. She let me in without saying a word. Her hair was shorter, her face thinner, but her eyes, they looked like mine. Haunted. She didn't offer coffee, didn't smile. She just handed me something the moment I stepped inside. A child's drawing. Crayons, unlined notebook paper. 4 stick figures standing in a circle, one lying down. Red scribbles all over. I looked up at her, confused, but she was already crying. "My daughter drew this last week," she said. "She doesn't know anything, okay?" But she said a man came to her window, said he told her a story. I felt the blood drain from my face. It wasn't just packages. It wasn't just memories. Someone was pushing into our lives, into our homes, watching us, whispering to our children. I stayed at Bree's house that night. We sat in the living room, too afraid to sleep. At one point, thought I saw someone across the street, just a shadow leaning against a lamppost. But when I stood up to look, they were gone. We talked about that night again, for the first time in years. About what we did, about the fact that none of us ever really knew who that man was. He had no ID, no phone, no wallet, just a weird tattoo on his forearm, 3 circles interlocking. It's like a Venn diagram but made with jagged lines, almost like scars. We never talked about that part with anyone. We were too scared. It hadn't seemed important at the time, not compared to everything else. But now, it felt like the center of everything. What if he hadn't just been some drifter? What if that symbol meant something? What if someone else knew what it meant? I left Bree's house with more questions than answers. As I drove home, I kept checking my mirrors, paranoid that every car behind me was following. Every turn, every headlight felt too familiar. And when I finally pulled into my driveway around 3 a.m., I saw something that made my heart nearly stop. Another package, smaller this time, balanced on my doorstep. I didn't touch it, okay? I just stood there, staring, the porch light humming above me. I already knew what was inside before I opened it. Another photograph. But this time, it was just me, standing in my kitchen, opening the first box. It's taken from outside the window. Whoever was doing this wasn't sending a warning anymore. They were proving a point. They'd been there, they were close, and they weren't going to stop. I didn't sleep that night, okay? Sat on the floor in my hallway with all the lights off, holding a kitchen knife like it was going to do anything against whoever was out there. Whoever had taken that photo of me through my window, whoever was now, reaching into my life like a hand crawling up from a grave. Every shadow in the room felt like it had weight, like it was watching. I kept thinking about the moment we buried the man, the way the dirt thudded dully against his body. The way we didn't speak after it was done, just scattered like ants. When the job was over, like pretending it never happened would somehow protect us. But now, it was obvious. We hadn't buried a man. We'd buried a fuse, and now it had burned all the way back to us. I kept going over the timeline in my head. That night, that noise in the woods, the way we were all laughing seconds before everything turned inside out. We weren't even supposed to be there. It was supposed to be one of those teenage things, a bonfire, some beers, trying to scare each other with ghost stories. Then that man came stumbling out of the trees, bloody, mute, like something had chewed him up and spat him back out. He didn't speak, just looked at us with these empty eyes, like he saw something in us we didn't. And Dev was the one who hit him. I still remember the sound, that crunch, like thick branches breaking. And when it was done, when the man stopped moving, none of us wanted to be the one to check for a pulse. That's why it happened the way it did. That's why we buried him. Out of panic, out of fear, not out of malice. But that didn't matter now. Someone knew. Someone had always known, but they'd waited 20 years. I kept thinking about Bree's daughter, how a stranger told her a story she didn't even know was true. That meant that the person wasn't just messing with us. They were watching. They knew our routines, our homes, our children. I didn't go to work the next day. I stayed inside, curtains drawn. I taped up the windows and started digging through everything I had from back then. Journals, yearbooks, even the old disposable camera I kept in a shoebox. Most of the pictures were useless, blurry shots of trees or party snapshots with red eye. But one stood out, a photo I never remembered taking. The woods at night, and in the distance, just barely visible through the blur, the same shape, the same outline of a man, standing too far from the firelight to be one of us. That's when it hit me. Maybe we didn't kill him. Maybe we killed the wrong person. Or maybe we only thought he was dead. I called Carly again and told her everything. The second package, the photo, the man in the old picture. She didn't hesitate. She said we had to go back to the woods, to where we buried him. It's not just about what we did, she said. It's about what we left behind. I didn't want to. God, I didn't. But something in me knew. She was right. If we didn't face it, it would keep coming. More photos, more packages, maybe worse. So I drove, met her by the old fire road around dusk. Okay. Everything looked the same, but smaller now, overgrown, eaten by time. The path to the clearing was still there, just faint. We had to push through branches and brush, but muscle memory took over. We both knew exactly where we were going. That scared me more than anything, how easy it was to find the place again, like the woods remembered us. The clearing was untouched. No markers, no signs, just a quiet, too still, like the ground itself was holding its breath. We stood there, side by side, not saying a word for what felt like hours. Then Carly dropped to her knees and started digging. No shovel, just her hands, like she needed to do it that way. I joined her, and after what felt like forever, our fingers hit something solid. Wood, old, rotted, a makeshift box we'd built that night, lashed together with rope and panic. We stared at it. I didn't want to open it. I begged her not to. Test, but she did. And it was empty, completely empty. The body was gone. No bones, no cloth, nothing, not even teeth. Just dirt. And at the bottom, a single folded scrap of paper. I picked it up, hands shaking. It was damp, but still legible. 4 words, written, in the same red ink from the package label. I was never alone. I dotted, like it burned. Carly was crying now, full-on sobbing, and I couldn't move, couldn't think. We left the woods without speaking. We didn't talk the entire drive back. We couldn't. Something had followed us home that night. Not just guilt, not just fear. Something else. Something that had waited in the dark all this time. Something that hadn't come alone. I didn't go home after the woods. I drove 4 hours just trying to get away from the silence in my head. There's a kind of quiet that isn't peaceful. It's more like the absence of something that should be there. Like the hum of your fridge or the sound of a distant train that you never really noticed until it stopped. That's what it felt like after seeing that empty grave. The weight of the truth was starting to shift in my mind, and I think part of me had already accepted something unnatural was happening. It wasn't just guilt anymore. It was a presence. Something had been there that night, watching us bury him. Maybe more than one. And now, whatever it was, it wanted us to know it hadn't forgotten. I found myself pulling into the old neighborhood where Dev used to live. I hadn't seen him in years. He'd moved away after college, never looked back, but I remembered the stories. It's the ones Carly and I had dismissed at the time. He'd started drinking, talking to himself, waking up with scratches on his arms he swore weren't there the night before. People said he was unstable. But now, after everything, I wondered if he'd seen what we hadn't. I got his address from an old mutual friend and drove straight there. His house was small, half hidden behind overgrown hedges and a rusted chain-link fence. It looked forgotten, just like him. When he opened the door, he didn't say anything at first, just stared at me like he already knew why I was there. "You saw it, didn't you?" he asked. His voice was hoarse, brittle, like he hadn't spoken to another person in weeks. I nodded, and he stepped aside to let me in. The inside of his place was worse, cluttered with books, newspaper clippings, old police reports, red string taped to the walls like some kind of conspiracy theory bunker. But it wasn't a theory. It was a record of everything that had happened since that night. There were names, people we didn't know, missing persons reports, similar patterns, similar wounds. Some were never found. Others were found posed, smiling in photographs taken after death. Dev had been tracking them. He pointed to a box in the corner filled with labeled VHS tapes. "They started showing up in my mailbox a year after we buried him," he said. "No sender, no return address, just footage." I didn't watch the first few. I thought it was a sick prank. Then I did. He didn't offer to play one. He just sat down, rubbed his face with both hands, and said the thing I still can't shake. "There's more than one." I didn't understand. "More? What?" I asked. "Killers." He shook his head. "Witnesses. People like us. People who saw something, buried something, and thought it ended there. But it didn't. Whatever we did, whatever we unleashed, it's feeding on us, one by one." I asked him why he never told the police, and he laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was pointless. Who would believe a story like that? A group of teens buried a body and 20 years later get haunted by something that shouldn't exist. Even now, saying it out loud sounds insane. But then Dev pulled something from under the couch. A box. Inside were items like the one I got. Evidence bags, murder weapons, each with a different name written in red ink. Some were knives. One was a tire iron. One was a brick with dried blood still on it. "They're not just reminding us," Dev said. "They're collecting, rebuilding the scene, like it's all one big performance. We're the audience." I left not long after that. I felt sick, like the ground was tilting under my feet. I wanted to believe he'd lost his mind, that none of this was real, that it was some shared delusion brought on by guilt and trauma and the internet feeding our paranoia. But then he gave me something, an envelope with my name on it. Said it showed up 3 days before I came. Inside was a photo, one I had never seen, but it was clearly me. Not now, back then. I was standing in the woods at the edge of the clearing, my hands dirty, face pale, looking directly at the camera. That was the moment I realized what scared me most. We were never alone that night. Ken, whatever watched us, didn't stop watching. It followed us through time, through towns, through our lives. We thought burying the past would erase it. But the past had roots, and now it was growing back up through the cracks, stronger than ever, with eyes, with memory, and with a hunger to finish what we interrupted. Dev warned me not to go back to Carly. She's next, he said, and if you're near her, so are you. I left anyway, 'cause I couldn't let her go through this alone. We'd started this together, and somehow I knew we'd end it together. Or not at all. I didn't go straight to Carly's place like I said I would. I couldn't. Not yet. Something Dev said kept replaying in my head about how the past had roots, about how this thing, whatever it was, had been watching us even back then. Kept thinking about that photo of me in the woods, the one I never knew was taken, and the look on my own face in that image. It wasn't just fear, it was confusion, like I was hearing something or someone whispering from the trees. And then it hit me. There was one part of that night I had never really thought about, something I had blocked out, maybe even on purpose. When we were digging the shallow grave, the ground wasn't as soft as it should have been, like someone had already been there before. I remember hitting something hard, wood, I think. We didn't stop to check. We just shifted the hole a little and kept going. But now I wondered if we had buried him on top of something else, or someone else. I drove back out to the site alone, this time with a flashlight, gloves, and a shovel. It was reckless, I know, but something in me needed to know what was under there. It's a kind of need that makes you ignore your own survival instinct. I parked a mile away and hiked in under the cover of dark, the trees bending overhead like they were leaning in to listen. The clearing looked different now, more open, like the forest had pulled back to give something space to breathe. I found the spot by memory, tracing my steps in the dirt like muscle memory, and when I reached it, I just stood there. I could still feel it, that cold pressure in the air, that strange silence. Started to dig, slow at first, then faster when I hit the soft layer we'd filled in all those years ago. It wasn't deep. We'd been scared kids, desperate to get it over with. But then I found it, okay? Not what we buried, but something below it. Something we hadn't seen. A rotted plank of wood, brittle with age. I cleared the dirt around it, pulled it up, and saw the edge of what looked like a wooden box. I kept going, working my fingers around it until the rest of it surfaced. It wasn't a coffin. It was older than that. It's more like a chest, but larger. When I pried the top off, the smell hit me first. Rot, mold, iron, and then I saw what was inside. Bones. Not just one set, dozens, maybe more. Some were small, child-sized. Others looked like they'd been broken and put back together wrong. There were tools too, rusted blades, heavy hammers, pliers, and photographs, black and white, curling at the edges, showing people tied to chairs, mouths open like they were screaming, but no sound. I nearly dropped the lid when I saw the last one. It was my face again, older this time. It's taken from a distance. I was walking into a grocery store, unaware. That photo couldn't be more than a week old. I stood there, shaking, staring at it. And then I heard something behind me. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, not trying to hide. I spun around, flashlight jerking, but there was nothing. Just trees. But I swear, one of them breathed. I didn't run at first. I backed up, step by step, until I reached my car. I left the hole open, the bones exposed. Part of me hoped someone else would find it and take this burden off me, too. But now I know that won't happen, because this isn't just about the person we buried. It never was. That grave was a marker, a warning, and we ignored it. We disturbed something old, something that had been feeding here long before we came along. The package wasn't the beginning. It was the call to finish what was started. This thing, whatever it is, it's not just haunting us. It's been waiting for us to come back, watching, collecting, preparing. And now that I've opened the box, it knows I'm ready, not to stop it, but to see it. To remember what we really did, and what we woke up under the floor of the woods. I didn't sleep after that night in the woods. I don't even remember driving home. Just remember my hands on the wheel, shaking so bad the car kept drifting toward the edge of the road, like it wanted to veer off and disappear into the trees. I left the shovel in the trunk, mud still caked on it, and locked all the doors behind me as soon as I got inside. Every light in my house stayed on. I kept thinking someone was outside, watching. Not even someone. Something I didn't tell Carly or Dev what I found. Not yet. I needed to make sense of it first. I needed to feel like I had some grip on reality before dragging them deeper into it. So instead, I went through the box, the one from the package, again, looking for something I might have missed. There was the knife, still wrapped in the blood-stained cloth, the photograph of the crime scene I never reported, my name, my handwriting on the corner, the files, old map with red markings across it. But this time, I looked closer at the ledger. It was leather-bound, the cover cracked and water-damaged. Inside, the pages were filled with dates and names. No explanations, just names, some crossed out, others underlined in red. It went back decades, while the earliest entries were written in handwriting that didn't even look modern, like it was from another time. And then, about halfway through the book, I found my name. Not just mine, Dev's, Carly's, even Trevor's, all of us. It's all listed under the same date, October 12, 2003, the night of the incident, the night we buried him. But what chilled me most wasn't that our names were there. It was what came after. It's an entry marked witnessed, claimed, bound, and under it, cycle begins again. 2023. There was no mistaking it now. It wasn't just someone playing a game. Okay? This was part of something bigger. Something that had a pattern, a schedule, and somehow we were marked. I didn't want to believe it. I told myself it was just some sick prank, someone messing with us for fun. But the pictures said otherwise. It's the photos taken without my knowledge. It's the ones from years ago and the one from last week. This person, or whatever it was, had been tracking us, quietly, patiently, for 20 years. And now, the time had come to collect. I took the ledger to a local historian, someone who specialized in town archives and old property records. I lied, said I found it in my grandfather's attic. He flipped through the pages, slow and careful, until he reached the back. That's where a symbol was burned into the page, something that looked like a circle split by jagged lines, like cracks in glass. He went pale when he saw it, closed the book, told me to leave. I asked him what it meant, but he just said, some things were meant to stay buried. I left, but I snapped a picture of the symbol before he took the book. Later that night, I searched through old Ridgewater records online, and I found it. Not in a public database, but in a scanned police report from the 1970s, a missing persons case. A boy found dead in the same woods where we buried the body. The symbol was carved into his chest. The report said the killer was never found, but a note in the margin, likely added by the detective, simply said, he comes in threes, always 3. The first kills, the second watches, the third opens the door. I didn't know what that meant. I still don't, but I had a sick feeling I was one of those 3. Maybe I was the killer. Maybe I was the door. I didn't want to tell Dev or Carly, but I had to. So I texted them, told them we were meeting that night, okay? And this time I was going to bring everything. The knife, the photos, the truth. Cass, we weren't just running from something we did. We were caught in something older, deeper, and it wasn't going to let go until it finished what it started. That night, I packed everything into a duffel bag. The ledger, the knife, the photos, the map. Even the printed crime scene report from the 1970s that I dug up online, and I drove out to Dev's place first. He didn't ask many questions. He just saw my face, pale and sunken, and knew something was seriously wrong. Carly arrived 20 minutes later, hair tied back, wearing a hoodie, looking more exhausted than I'd ever seen her. We didn't speak at first. It was the kind of silence that fills a room before something heavy drops. I dumped the bag out on the coffee table and let the items speak for themselves. I showed them the ledger, flipping straight to the page with our names on it. Carly stared at it, like it might bite her. Dev leaned in, finger tracing the lines. Claimed, bound, he said out loud, almost whispering it. I showed them the symbol, the one the historian refused to talk about. Ken told them about the boy found in the woods back in the 70s. I told them about the margin note. He comes in threes. The first kills, the second watches, the third opens the door. Carly pulled her knees to her chest and didn't say a word. Dev finally asked the question none of us had dared say. Which one of us opened the door? I didn't answer. I didn't know. Maybe it was all three of us. Maybe by being there that night, 20 years ago, by standing around a dying man and making a choice to walk away, or worse, to bury the secret. Maybe we had all opened something we shouldn't have. Carly finally spoke. She confessed something that shattered the fragile trust we had left. I didn't just panic when we found the body, she said. I saw something, someone. Her voice was barely audible. There was someone standing behind the trees, watching us. I thought it was just my brain playing tricks on me, so I never told you guys. But I swear to God, there was a figure there, just standing still, watching. Dev swore under his breath, pacing, so we were watched. Even then, we were never alone out there. That revelation hit hard. I started to wonder if maybe the man we buried wasn't alone either. Maybe he hadn't even been the real threat. Maybe we'd interrupted something we didn't understand. Or maybe we'd been chosen, marked from the beginning. That would explain the photos. The package, the bloodied knife that had never been turned over to police because there was no police report to begin with. No one knew about that night except us and whoever or whatever was watching. We agreed we needed to go back, not just to the burial site, but beyond that, deeper into the woods, where the map in the ledger pointed, 'cause there was something marked there, a spot far from any trail, a red X, circled over and over again in different ink, like someone had visited it more than once. The date scribbled beside it was recent, just 2 weeks ago. We packed flashlights, boots, gloves. This time, we were prepared. Or at least, we thought we were. The woods were colder than they should have been for fall. The trees were bare, their limbs gnawed like arthritic hands, clawing at the sky. As we walked, the air grew heavier, quieter. Even the wind didn't dare blow out there. The trail ended, but we kept going, following the GPS marker I'd set to match the X on the map. It took hours. The trees grew denser, closer together, until they formed a kind of tunnel around us. We were miles from the road, completely isolated. And then we found it, a clearing we hadn't seen before. At the center, a stone structure covered in moss, shaped like an altar. It was old, not just old, but ancient looking, worn down by time and weather and something else. Carved into the top was the same cracked glass symbol. IIT was stained dark. Not paint, not moss. It looked like dried blood. Beside it was a box, not locked, just sitting there. like it had been waiting. I hesitated. Carly shook her head. Don't touch it. But Dev was already reaching. Kay opened the box slowly, and inside was another knife, identical to the one we'd received in the mail, wrapped in cloth, same exact pattern, and beneath it, a note, typed, clean. No handwriting, said. The cycle restarts with the one who buried him first. Dev looked at me. I looked at Carly. Then we all realized we couldn't even remember who had thrown the first shovelful of dirt that night, 20 years ago. It all blurred together, right? But someone had. And now, the pact or curse or whatever this was, it wanted. That debt paid. The woods didn't feel like woods anymore. The air had turned electric, buzzing with something we couldn't see. We didn't talk much on the way back. We were all too afraid to say what we were thinking, that maybe we weren't just haunted. Maybe we were hunted. That whatever had watched us that night, whatever had followed us for 20 years, was waiting for us to mess up, to run, split up, to lose faith in each other. 'Cause then it could strike, okay? And we wouldn't even know what hit us. The days after we found the altar were like waking up inside a dream that kept tightening around my neck. Not quite a nightmare, but something colder, slower, more calculating. Carly stopped answering her phone the morning after we got back. Dev said she texted him something vague, "I need time," and then disappeared off the grid. No one at her apartment. Her car still in the garage. Rent paid up, but no trace of her inside. I called her sister in Minnesota, who said she hadn't heard from Carly in months and was actually blocked on every platform. I asked Dev if he thought maybe she had just gone off the deep end. Maybe the altar got to her. Maybe. She was scared we were being watched. But when I said it out loud, even I didn't believe it. It didn't feel like Carly was running. It felt like she'd been taken off the board. The note in the box came back to me. The cycle restarts with the one who buried him first. That line echoed in my head like some kind of curse. I couldn't stop thinking about who to throw that first scoop of dirt. I kept seeing flashes of that night, the blood on the man's chest, his eyes rolled back, the smell of wet leaves and copper in fear, but it was like my mind wouldn't let me rewind to that exact moment, like something was missing, like something had been taken from me. I started digging through old boxes in my attic, desperate for anything that might help. Yearbooks, Polaroids, burned. CDs, one of them had a label on it in Carly's handwriting. Senior year, real stuff. I hadn't played a CD in years, but I found an old drive and plugged it into my laptop. At first, it was just dumb videos of us at parties, drinking, yelling over music, trying to act older than we were. Then one file, no label, started playing. It was shot in the woods. Those woods. Someone, probably Dev, was holding the camera. It was dark, maybe just after sunset. The video was shaky. I could see our teenage selves, joking and nervous, pushing through branches. And then, the figure. There was a man in the distance, stumbling. Blood on his shirt, that same one we found. But what made my stomach twist was what came next. A voice behind the camera whispered, "You think he's still breathing?" Then laughter, nervous laughter. Then another voice said, "Just dig. We have to dig. He's not going to make it." The camera swung around and caught a flash of me, holding the shovel. Me. It was me. I was the first one. I started the burial. I threw the first dirt. I stared at the screen for what felt like hours. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. The cycle restarts with the one who buried him first. I didn't realize what I'd done. Not really, but something, whatever power or force or person had started this new. It had been waiting, keeping score. And now that I had remembered, it was coming. That night, I heard tapping on my windows. I live in a second-story walk-up, the kind of building where you'd have to scale a drain pipe or climb a tree to reach the window, but the tapping was rhythmic, patient, like someone or something was trying to lull me into coming close. I stayed perfectly still. I didn't even breathe. It stopped after 10 minutes, but I didn't sleep that night. And the next morning, my mailbox was open. Inside, another box, smaller, unmarked, no return address. Same packaging as the one that started all this. I brought it inside, hands trembling. Opened it. Inside was a phone, old, cracked, dead. I plugged it into a charger, watching the screen flicker on. It took a few minutes to boot up. Only one video file on it. No name, just a black thumbnail. I tapped it open. It was footage of Carly from what looked like that same altar clearing in the woods. She was tied to something, not screaming, not struggling, just breathing fast, eyes wide with fear. Someone stepped into frame, wearing a mask that looked like cracked porcelain, painted with that same broken circle symbol. And then the video cut out. No sound, no ending. Dread. It was like a warning, or a promise. Dev came over the second I called him. I showed him the video. He didn't speak for a long time. Then he whispered, "You saw it too, right? The third figure." I asked what he meant. He scrubbed back through the footage, frame by frame, and then I saw it. Off in the corner, for less than a second, someone standing just beyond the trees, watching, filming, wearing the same mask. "There's more than one," Deb said. "Tease, there's always been more than one." That night, we made a decision. Not a smart one, maybe not even a safe one, but a decision. We were going back. We're going to that altar again, no matter what. Because this wasn't just about Carly anymore. It wasn't about a single night we buried in the woods. This was bigger, older. Whatever was hunting us was playing a long game. And now the countdown had started. I knew what I'd done, and I knew it was coming for me next. The days after that video arrived were the worst I can remember. Every sound in my apartment was amplified. The creak of the floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator, even my own breathing felt loud and unnatural. I was waiting for something to break in, or for someone to call, or for that masked figure to show up at my door. But nothing happened at first. Instead, I felt like I was being watched from every corner, every mirror, every shadow. I started sleeping with the lights on and the door locked, but it didn't matter. The fear had settled deep inside me, like poison that wouldn't leave my veins. I called Dev every day, checking in, trying to keep us connected, because I knew that whatever was chasing us worked best when we were alone. Carly was still missing. No sign of her anywhere. I wondered if the video was a warning or a threat. Then one night, around 2 a.m, my phone buzzed. It's an unknown number. Squaw answered with a trembling voice, and there was silence, just heavy breathing on the other end. Then a voice, cold and cracked, whispered my name. It was me, my own voice, saying something I didn't remember saying. I hung up. I called Dev immediately. He said he'd gotten the same call, and that it was happening to others from our past. People who had been near the burial site. People who had even heard the stories. The entity, or a person, or whatever it was reaching out, trying to break us down one by one. We agreed that meeting again was necessary, okay? This time, with a plan. We researched everything we could. Legends, police records, old newspaper clippings. Anything about that symbol, the broken circle, and the phrase about 3 figures. What we found was chilling. The symbol was linked to an obscure cult active decades ago in our town, one that believed in sacrifice and watching the chosen. They were never caught, but rumors said they had survived underground, passing their rituals through secret circles. The "he comes in threes" line, we learned, referred to a ritualistic process. The first would commit the act, the second would observe and remember, the third would open a gateway for something else to enter the world. Suddenly, it all made sense. The bodies, the watching figures, the packages, the videos, they weren't random. They were parts of a ritual still being carried out, maybe by descendants of that cult, or by something that never left the woods. The night we went back to the altar, Dev brought cameras, sound recorders, even a small electric altar bell he'd bought online for some reason I couldn't explain. We set up around the stone and waited. Hours passed. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Then, just after midnight, the bell rang. Not from our equipment, but from somewhere deeper in the woods. A slow, steady ringing that made the hairs on my neck stand up. We followed the sound deeper into the trees until we reached a clearing we didn't know existed. There, carved into the dirt, was a large, jagged circle, the symbol, and around it, fresh footprints, too big to be ours, too small to be an animal's. We heard whispers, faint but clear, not words, but a sound like breath, like voices just out of earshot, calling us by name. I wanted to run. Dev wanted to stay. Carly was nowhere to be found. Then something moved behind the trees. A figure, tall, wearing that cracked porcelain mask, slowly stepping into the moonlight. It didn't speak. It didn't blink. It just stared, okay? And I felt deep inside that this was the moment we all had been running from, okay? The moment the cycle would either break or swallow us whole.